Hello YouTubers. This video is about the latest and greatest .NET preview version release. Today we're going to talk about .NET 6.0 preview, which Richard have announced about a month ago, and then the second preview was announced, and then Sourabh from the ASP.NET program management team announced some very interesting features around, Blazor applications with .NET 6. .NET 6 comes in with a lot of great features. Some of the best features that it comes with is the priority queues. You have MAUI where you can actually write seamless, fluent mobile applications. You can turn Blazor applications into desktop applications, which Steve Sanderson have demonstrated in multiple places. I'll make sure I reference the link in the description of this video. But one of the most interesting things that I have noticed that comes in with .NET 6 is dynamic components in Blazor. I noticed that, there is a lot of questions around, how does it work, what can you do, and how you can use it, and all that kind of stuff. And funny enough, dynamic components actually loading components dynamically within one page is super crucial to some business operations, right? The simplest thing that I can think of is basically when you are building a form and the form has multiple questions, and based on the question, the answer that you select, you load in a completely different component based on the answers of the person answering this question. So how do you use really dynamic components? This video specifically is about an exploration, a preliminary exploration, an introduction to using dynamic components in a Blazor application. But before we get started with that, there's a couple of things that I want you to do. Number one, please make sure that you go to the .NET page and download the .NET 6, which is a preview, the second preview version. So if you go to .net.microsoft.com/download/.NET/6.0, and I'll make sure I also put the description, the URL in the description of the video, so you can go in there and actually download it. So you need to download this, but also additionally, make sure you get your production-ready version of Visual Studio up to date. I think it's version 18.9. I'll give you the reference in a second. Let's just go ahead and get started with a simple Blazor application. Now, something for you, if you are an old-timer Blazor user, you will notice a couple of things here. There's Blazor Server app and there's another Blazor Server app, and these are just, the second one is an outdated template. I don't think it'll even let you start. If you actually select this one and go all the way through, it'll say this supports 3.1 and it's not supported anymore, or out of support anymore. So 3.0 out of support, 3.1 is long-term support. It'll basically tell you I don't support this template and what it's using anymore, which is a great feature. Hopefully they will remove the outdated template soon. But the one that you want to select is the one with more tags under it, the one that has Linux, Mac OS, Windows, Cloud, Web, and C Sharp. You want to select this one. So let's go ahead and select this one in here. And let's call this one My Dynamic Form. And then out of the options here, you will notice that I have the .NET 6.0 preview. All right, so there's the 3.1 long-term support. There's the .NET 5, which is the current stable. Highly recommend you take the leap and upgrade your software to use .NET 5. And then there's the new long-term support, which is .NET 6. Let's go ahead and select .NET 6. I love that they added the authentication for individual account, Microsoft Identity Platform, or Windows. Beautiful, saves a lot of time. It makes it a lot easier to build, web applications with login and registration, all that kind of stuff, in a split second. Okay, so here's my application in here. And I want you to pay attention with me here, because what we're going to do is that we're going to create a bunch of components and we're going to try to load them dynamically. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead in here and create just really, really simple components, nothing big. I'm just going to create a new folder here that I'm going to call components. And under these components, I'm just going to create a bunch of razor components. Doesn't really matter what they are. I'm just going to go ahead and here I say this is my text box component. Here's one. And this one only uses a text box component. So it's just input type text. Just a simple text box component. There's no magic there. And then I'm going to go and create, usually I put those, the people that are familiar with my standard, I usually put those in a base component because these are native controls. I wrap them up in base component and use them in a component. But just for the purpose of this demo, I'm just trying to show you real quick how you can actually load components on the fly super quick with Blazor. So let's go ahead in here and do a checkbox component like this, and this one is also going to be, here's an input type checkbox like this. Should we make a third one? Let's make a third one. I like odd numbers. Let's go ahead and create another one, which is radio button component like this, and this will be input type radio. There you go. So radio box component, radio button component, and text box component. And I want to load those dynamically. So when I select from a list, I am able to actually load all of these components dynamically on my page. How do I go about doing something like that? This is where you see the power of a dynamic component, the dynamic component feature, which comes in with Blazor and .NET 6. So let's go ahead into the index page in here. Let's write some code. I'm going to write all the code here, even though I put it in the background, and then I switch over so you can see the whole thing. Just for the purpose of this demo, let me zoom in for the people that are watching this on their cell phones. And let's just go ahead and do this. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a select box like this, and each one of those will have some options. There's an option like this. And each one of those options will have a value in it. Okay, that's great. I could do that. And inside each one of these values, I'm going to add in one of my new components. Obviously, you can load this dynamically from a list if you want to. The whole point is just to show you the power of this dynamic component, how it works on the fly like this. So here's the name of the values that I have. That's a stringified value because your select can only take that kind of value, stringified value, right? So we're giving them the checkbox component. Let's bring in the namespace here. So this is my dynamic form dot components. That's it. So there's a checkbox component, then there's a text box component, and then there is a radio button component like this. All right, so these are all my options. And I'm gonna need to steal those because I want to repeat those in the display area, right? So this is this guy, and this guy. All right, great. So these are the values that I have in here. And all I really want to do is that when I select an option, it will go and pick up that component and load it dynamically for me. That's really all I'm trying to do here. Since this is really too long, too large, I want my stuff to look nice. I'm just going to break them apart because I'm just like that. So let's go ahead and do this, and this. All right, Control KD should take care of it. Yeah, that looks much better. All right, so we have these options, right? If I run my application right now, I should be able to see these options in their stringified format. So it should say text box component. It should say, radio button component, all these options out of the box with the checkbox is a default selection, like you can see here. So these are my components right here. Okay, that's very straightforward. That's easy. Now let's go ahead and write some code. Just for the purpose of this demo, please don't do this in your production environment. Usually write the code behind you know, so you can separate your CSS from your C# code from your markup. But just for the purpose of this demo, we're just going to go ahead and display it this way. What's the first thing I want to do? I want to go and say this value here is bounded to the value of the select. So when the select happens, when a change happens on the select, you know, it'll basically update the value in there. So how do we go about doing this? We want to give it a default value first, right? So I'm going to give it a default value of a checkbox in here, components. We see name of, that will stringify that value for you. And then I'm going to go ahead in here and say on change, like this. Not yet, not on change. Let's just go ahead and say bind, and let's bind this to the selected value. So every time this selected value will change, that that option will load based on the selected value. Let's prove it, right? Ideally, if I don't have this selected value set up, it will load the checkbox by default. Let's go and put in the text box here by default, right? Is that gonna make my drop-down select list go to the text box by default? Let's find out. Let's see how that works. So you see, this is text box, which is the second value, right? This is the second value. So that means that this binding that happened between this component here, right? Between this component here and between the selected value is working. Okay, so this is just as simple as that. List of components, and then this is my selected type. All right. Now, that means that every time I change that, it will actually hit that select value and it will change the value of it. Now we want to turn this into a type. Why do I want to turn this into a type? So I can take that type and actually load it in that dynamic object. How do I go about doing something like that? Let's go ahead in here and put a function that can capture the value when this value changes, so we can extract the value for it. I'm going to go ahead in here and say type selected type. Okay, this is selected type, and this selected type by default is loaded to type of checkbox component, but that's going to change. I'm going to go ahead and build a little function in here that says on change, that takes in change event args. Here's my change event args, like this, Control KD, loaded and beautiful. And now when that change happens, I want to map that string into a type, and I want to pass that type into my dynamic component. You see what I'm saying? So the string, every time you select an option from your drop-down, it'll basically take that option in its string format and turn it into a type, and then pass that type to the dynamic object. How does that work? I can go ahead in here and say, well, my selected type then will be, right, type get value, sorry, get type, and get type takes in a string, right? It takes a string in there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do a string interpolation here real quick, and I'm gonna put the namespace of this guy. So that namespace that will lead me to my components. The entire namespace dot, and here's a little string interpolation here, and I'm going to pass in there the selected value. So that now becomes my type. So that guy now becomes my type because it's basically passing in the type, you know, converting the value selected back into the type. All right, now the only thing that's left for us is to just go and use this new thing called dynamic component. This new beautiful thing, thanks to the ASP.NET team, Daniel Roth, Steve Sanderson, and the, you know, huge geniuses behind them that actually make this possible. You know, so you can build more dynamic, more flawless, you know, web applications. All you gotta do here is just select a type. So look at this. This is my dynamic component, like this. And this guy takes a type as an input parameter. Where's my type? It's the selected type that I referenced earlier. Right? So this dynamic component will go and say, let me put in a kind of a break in here. So you can actually see this completely I know CSS folks will say, no, you can make, margin and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's just a demo. I don't build my software this way. Okay. All right. So every time the type changes, I'm going to go and load this type based on the value, right? But this value, I want to capture the value that has changed because there's binding already going on. Then that value might have already changed. Let's just see what that looks like. I might either just need to take the change event arg and extract the value off of it. Either way, it works. So let's see if that's our case here. So this is, yeah, we need to do that binding in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and take that change event arg in there, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say this is my value. Right? So that's my value right here. Okay, so when that happens, I'm gonna add in a new function here called onChange, and I'm just gonna pass in my function here, which is also onChange with an @ sign. I don't think I need this selected value anymore, but we'll see how that works out. Let's see what the error is that we're getting here. It's basically onChange used 2 or more times the attribute onChange. Let me get rid of this guy completely, because bind is probably using onChange as well in and of itself. And let's get rid of this guy completely as well. We don't need it. We don't really need it. Okay, perfect. Okay then. So every time a change happens, this is going to load checkbox by default. And then when I select, it will render and change. We might need state has changed or something like that just to silently refresh the page. We'll see how that looks like. Okay. Here's my page, checkbox component, text box, boom, radio button, and so on and so forth. Works like a charm. You're basically dynamically. So the idea here is that if you are running a form, right, a full form, and you're selecting checkboxes and stuff like that, you want to trigger that event on change. And that event should pull in more data and actually load more information for you. That's basically the essence of it. This dynamic, I mean, ideally there's probably 50,000 ways you can do this without using a dynamic component. This just makes it a lot cleaner and a lot easier to use. You can absolutely use render fragments, right? You can just go ahead and say, you know, if the selected type is this, then load that, or just pick up the type and say I want to render that. This by far is the cleanest way I could think of that could help you dynamically load objects. You can actually do this in like the amount of ways you can implement something like this is infinite, right? Because, let's say you have a registration form. So every time you click next, you want to load the next form dynamically. How does that work out? You need some parameters. And the parameters that you can literally build an entire dynamic form, in one page just simply by controlling the parameter, the object that you're iterating on. Let's say you're going for form 1 and then form 2 and then form 3, and every one of these forms had their own class and their own type, right? All you have to do is just pass in that type, and the dynamic component will know how to load it for you. One last thing before I let you go, let's say some folks might ask the question, say, well, I have components, but they have parameters. I have components, but they have parameters. What do I do about that? The ASP.NET team also took care of this piece. You see another input parameter here called parameters. And this guy takes in a dictionary of a string and an object. And you can basically build your entire dictionary accordingly. All you have to do is really go and say, well, I want to pass in all the parameters in there, right? I want to pass in, student name, age, I want to pass in a function, try that. I haven't tried that myself, but your parameters would be right here. So technically, you could have a bulk of data literally loaded in a database coming in with component names and coming in with parameters, literally coming from the database, and it automatically immediately loads in onto your UI just simply by using this dynamic component feature. So that's pretty much it. I'm sorry, it's a very short session, but I wanted to walk you through how you would actually go implement something like that. I will definitely share this code on one of my GitHub repos. But more importantly, this is coming with .NET 6. It's really, really useful and really important for you as an engineer to get on these new things, as fast as you can, because it's part of your growth to actually jump onto the new technologies and using new frameworks so it can improve your overall experience as an engineer, makes your life easier, to build software, but at the same time, it helps you build even stronger, more reliable, more flexible and fluent applications. That's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please drop a comment in the comment section, and I'll see you in another video.